Hey, welcome to the Next Wave podcast. I'm Matt Wolf. I'm here with my co-host Nathan Lands. And in this show, it is our goal to keep you looped in on all the latest AI news, all of the coolest AI tools, and just generally what's going on in the AI world. And the last couple weeks have been absolutely insane in the AI world. There have been so many announcements. We had Google I.O., we had OpenAI's announcements, we had 2 different keynotes from Microsoft, and all of these announcements had so much going on around AI. So we thought we'd do a fun little bonus episode, maybe a little bit shorter than normal, and just kind of riff and talk about some of these announcements and, you know, get you looped in on what's going on in the world of AI right now. So the first event that came up last week was the OpenAI event, which is kind of funny because we knew Google I.O. was happening last week on Tuesday. So what does OpenAI do? They go and make their announcement on Monday, the day before the big Google I.O. event. That was sort of the kickoff to this announcement fest of all of these AI announcements from these big companies. And of course, the big OpenAI announcement was GPT-4o. And during this announcement, they showed off some demos of GPT-4o, being able to sort of have conversations with you. The inflections of the voices change. The voices sound eerily similar to Scarlett Johansson, which is the the voice of the AI in Her. So there's some drama going around about that. But I figured let's kick off this conversation talking about GPT-4o. So, I mean, Nathan, like, what are your initial thoughts when you watched that keynote? Like, were you blown away by it? Were you underwhelmed by it? Like, what were your thoughts when you first watched it?
I was honestly blown away by it. Like, just like, you know, in one of our previous videos, we talked about how I think in a year from now, voice will be the main way that you interact with AI. And it's like, okay, well, now here it is. Like, they're showing you can actually just talk to the AI. You can actually even interrupt it. It can be talking and you can just like interrupt it and start talking again. It's not like the old one where you have to like record and then like it processes and then it says something and you have to wait till it's done. No, you can just like talk back and forth with it. And it wasn't perfect, but damn, it's pretty good for like a first version of like this kind of voice interaction with AI. But yeah, I was pretty blown away by it personally.
You know, one of the big announcements that came out with the GPT-4o is that pretty much the latest state-of-the-art models that, you know, the general consumers are going to get access to, they're going to give them access free, right? So like the GPT-4o, people are going to get, they're going to get access to that just in the free ChatGPT now. Before, you know, if you had the free ChatGPT, you were using, you know, GPT 3.5, an older model. If you were on the ChatGPT Plus subscription, you got GPT-4 Turbo. The naming conventions are all, you know, weird because you got GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo, GPT-4o, GPT 3.5. Like, it's all confusing. But, you know, Sam Altman actually made a comment in one of the recent interviews that he's probably going to stop, you know, naming them GPT-4, GPT-5, GPT-6, right? They're going to just sort of land on a name and just keep on improving on that version over and over again. But I thought it was really cool that they're basically saying our most state-of-the-art model, the best models that we're putting out, you're going to be able to use just for free now in the free version of ChatGPT. I thought that was really, really cool. And then if you're a Plus subscriber, then you just get more use, right? You're going to get some of the features a little bit earlier than everybody else, but you're going to get like 5 times more input output with the model.
I think it's a big deal because, you know, most people, when they think of AI, they're thinking of ChatGPT and they're typically thinking of the free model, right? Which has been 3.5, which, you know, compared to 4 is really, really bad. And so the fact now that someone gets, you know, I think 4.0 in some ways is not as good as 4 in some ways, but it's pretty darn close and it's way, way faster. So for most people, that's going to be such a, you know, step forward in terms of what they believe is possible with AI. Like, and so I think that's going to lead to like a lot more awakening around like, oh, AI is actually here. It's really powerful. But, you know, I think one thing worth thinking about, though, is like apparently they were training this model with a separate team ever since 2022. So my understanding is like, yeah, this is kind of their state-of-the-art model, but I don't think it's their like flagship model. I think it's just like another model that they were developing, and so they put it out there for free. My theory is it's probably built on like a better architecture where it's more cost-efficient. That's why they're able to give away for free. That's why it's faster. And then 5 is probably going to be built on top of that as well. And so I think we're still going to see GPT-5 quite soon, and it may not be multimodal. That's my big question. Like, okay, so if it's a different model, are we going to get something that's dramatically smarter with GPT-5? But it's not multimodal yet, it's just text.
Yeah, but this new model, GPT-4o, was pretty multimodal, right? They were inputting video,
Yeah.
although I think the video they were showing, it was just sort of looking at screenshots from the video. It wasn't actually watching the video, because there was one moment in their demo where he picked up the phone and like smiled into the camera, and it was like, oh, I'm looking at something wood. And he was like, no, that was before. Now look at my face, right? So it obviously sort of like took a snapshot of the table or whatever. And then when he looked at his face, it still was like thinking about the picture of the table or something. So I don't think it's actually using video, but it does seem to be ingesting audio. You can put images into it. So, I mean, it's pretty multimodal already. I think the real question is, are we going to get like actual video input with GPT-5?
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
So there were some other announcements during the OpenAI event, so I'll just kind of rattle off some of them. I've got my notes here in front of me. They talked about a new desktop app, which, it's pretty cool. It's only available on Mac right now. They didn't make it available on PC right away. And I think, I'm at the Microsoft event right now. If you're watching on video, you can see I've got a different background than normal. I think we found out why they didn't release a Mac version while I'm at the Microsoft event, but we'll get into that when we start talking about the Microsoft event here. But the desktop app, it's pretty cool. I tested it out on my Mac. It doesn't have the voice features in it yet. It doesn't have the feature where it can view your desktop yet. You can take a screenshot, drag the image in, and chat with the screenshot essentially, but it doesn't just look at your desktop like they showed in the demo yet. It's pretty much the same thing you get inside of the ChatGPT web app, just, on your desktop now. We also learned that that GPT-4o chatbot that was all over Limsys on the chatbot arena, apparently that was GPT-4o. That was them kind of testing that out to see how people would work with it. And, the other big thing was like the voices in it, right? Like the GPT-4o, it feels like a marginal improvement with like the intelligence of it, in my opinion, right? It doesn't seem like huge leaps above what we were getting before, other than in coding. It seems to work really well with coding. But the voice stuff was, I think, the thing that most people were going nuts about from that keynote, right? When you speak to it, you can tell it to give you more emotion, get more excited about it, talk like a robot, do all that sort of stuff. And then when they were demoing it, that's also where we heard the voice, which sounded very similar to Scarlett Johansson. But I think that was the thing that people really went nuts over, was that voice thing. And like you mentioned earlier in this episode, we did a whole episode about how like voice is that next thing, right? Voice is what's going to be the sort of input of all of these large language models. And when ChatGPT showed off that voice and there was really like no latency, they would ask a question, it would respond almost in the same amount of time a real human would respond. That was the thing that was probably the biggest sort of differentiator about, that from what came before it.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted about the whole Scarlett Johansson thing yesterday, and it got a lot of attention, especially on LinkedIn for some reason. People, seem pretty upset about it. I have mixed feelings. I mean, I guess to give people context, like Scarlett Johansson put out a statement, or I'm not sure if it was officially from her, but her publicist, said that it really happened, where OpenAI contacted Scarlett Johansson, asked like, can we use your voice? She's like, no, you can't. And apparently they kept trying and she just refused, and they kind of picked a voice that seemed similar to hers. And then she's saying not only that, but then like they threw it in my face because like Sam Altman like tweeted to somebody like the word her, and like referencing the movie where she's like the main voice for the AI system. I have mixed feelings about it because like when you actually, somebody else shared a side-by-side comparison of the voices, like here's one, here's the Sky voice, the OpenAI voice, and then here's Scarlett Johansson's voice. They're quite different. I mean, like they don't sound like, sure, it sounds like an attractive woman talking or something, but it doesn't sound really like Scarlett Johansson. Yeah. And then like, so can she really, like, what does she own? Like AI, like feminine AI voices forever, right? Like that's kind of, that's kind of like a wild statement to make, that you own that. But who knows? They'll probably still end up having to settle with her for the fact that like he said her, if I had to guess.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, OpenAI did put out their own statement around what was going on. They said that they hired a different voice actor, not Scarlett Johansson. They trained on hours and hours of this other voice actor's work to get this in. But from what I understand, they actually are not planning on launching with that Sky voice now. That, just to avoid all the controversy and all the issues that might come up. I think that, right now they're just saying we're just not going to launch with that voice. We don't want to deal with all that. So we'll see how that plays out. So HubSpot just put out this really cool checklist. It's called the AI Adoption Checklist. And if you're trying to implement AI into your business in any way whatsoever, this checklist has you covered, from security to privacy to planning to training. This has you covered. Click the link in the description below and grab the checklist today. Yeah, so then the very next day after this OpenAI keynote where they made those announcements was the Google I.O. Event, where that's Google's developer conference where they typically make all of their announcements. And this year it was once again all about AI. In fact, at the end of the conference, Sundar, the CEO of Google, actually counted up how many times they said AI, and it was like 121 times or something throughout the presentation. One thing that I find interesting between the two keynote presentations was that I feel like ChatGPT and OpenAI, they really sort of like honed in on like the one thing, right? They really sort of honed in on like the voice feature and the chatting and the conversational element of it, and the, you know, the tone and the intonations of the voice. It was very, very focused on that thing. The Google event, in contrast to it, was like, here's an announcement, here's an announcement, here's an announcement, here's an announcement. It was just 2 hours of an announcement after announcement after announcement. I was at the event, and I'm actually kind of struggling right now to remember what were all the announcements Google made, right? So like ChatGPT or OpenAI had like one big announcement that everybody remembers, everybody talked about. Google just like bombarded us with announcements, but they were all kind of so marginal that I almost forget them. Like, I know I've got my notes in front of me, but like there's nothing that stands out in my mind of like, Google talked about this and that is game changing. But I'm curious, Nathan, like from you, was there anything from the Google keynote that, you know, specifically stood out that was like, okay, wow, that's something that Google did that I thought was impressive?
No, I mean, I think it was like information overload. Like they put out so many things. And if you look at, you know, the OpenAI event in comparison, it was way more like Steve Jobs like, right? Where there's like, here's this one thing that we have, and they just, you know, demonstrate it in a beautiful way. And I think OpenAI did a really good job too, where they even humanized it more by having all these different team members show the same thing in different ways. Here's the AI voice, our CTO co-founder showing it to you, presenting it to you. And then here's people from the team, and here's how they're using it. And they showed like these 6-7 different use cases, all with the same product, the same AI voice. And I thought that was such a great way to like reiterate the one thing over and over and over. So by the end of it, it was like really ingrained in your head, like, oh, they've done an amazing job with AI voice. Whereas with, you know, with Google, it's they release so many things, and it's not clear when a lot of it's actually going to come out. That's really hard to like pinpoint, like, oh yeah, what's the one thing? And I was like, it sounds like, oh yeah, they made a lot of progress. There's a lot of cool things they did, but you know, and like I put out Twitter threads about both companies' announcements, and you know, my Twitter thread about OpenAI got like 5.9 million views, and my tweet thread about Google, I think it got maybe like 50,000 views just in comparison. So it kind of shows you the general interest level in OpenAI's announcement versus Google's announcement.
Yeah, one thing that I found like really interesting about the OpenAI event was that they had so much more that they could have talked about as well, right? Like they put out a blog post about all of the stuff that they were rolling out with their new rollout. This GPT-4o is its own image generator. It's not using DALL-E. It's like using its own built-in image generator. It can do text to like 3D object. It's got like a ton of features on their blog post, but in that keynote, they focused in on like the one thing that I thought maybe they felt was going to have the most impact on people from watching that event. So I thought that was really interesting that they could have themselves done a 2-hour keynote where they bombarded us with OpenAI announcements, but they chose to focus on just like one or two key things. Yeah. So I felt that was really, really interesting as well.
Yeah, and I thought it was fascinating too that, you know, Sam Altman didn't appear. And so for me, that's like, okay, he didn't appear because he's going to appear when GPT-5 comes out in like 3 months.
I'm at the Microsoft event now. He was here. He was part of that keynote. But we'll get to Microsoft in a minute. Like, I do want to talk about a few more of the Google things that they announced, because there was some that I thought was cool while I was there. But they're also like, if I'm being honest, they're kind of like, they're sort of gimmicky, and they're kind of like almost forgettable, but they're still kind of cool, right? Like, they showed out this feature called Ask Photos, where you can basically use like an AI search to search through your photos. And some of the examples they gave was like, when did my daughter learn how to swim? And it would look through all of your photos, all of the timestamps, try to find photos where your daughter is swimming, and then, you know, tell you your daughter learned to swim based on all of your photos, right? So it uses the photos as context to answer your questions. That I thought was pretty cool. Like, I can see that being really useful if you have a giant database of photos on your computer with like thousands of photos and you're trying to find like one specific thing. Or maybe you're making a video online and you need like some B-roll for your video, and you want the B-roll to just be like shots of the ocean or something.
Yeah.
You could go in there and let the AI find like just the shots that you're looking for. So I thought Ask Photos was a pretty cool feature.
When I saw that demo, I was like, oh, that was amazing. They probably should have made that better and really focus on something like that, because it's like they announced like 10 things, and most of it seemed like they were just kind of like tacking on AI onto existing products, right? It's like a whole joke about like,
I think a lot of it was.
If you see like the little 3 stars, that means you're just like adding AI on for like the sake of it, right? And and it felt like a lot of their stuff was that. And there was this engineer who made a statement about that the other day. Apparently he worked at Google for like 20-something years. He was a pretty, top engineer at Google. And he said they're doing the same they did with Google Plus when like Facebook came out, where like they're like panicking, they had to create something else, and they're just like we have to have a social network. Well, let's just put all Google's existing stuff into a social network, and like it just doesn't work. And they're also changing search too, which I mean is a big deal. Where they're like using AI to like analyze the results of a lot of search terms. I guess it's only like 1% or so of searches are currently using that feature, but it rolled out like 2 days ago, and it's apparently some people in SEO land are already seeing like 20% drop in traffic from that, like in the last week. And so it's they're in a tough situation, because like all the stuff they release, they're gonna like cause issues if they just start dramatically changing Google search.
Well, I mean, their revenue is all from ad revenue from search, right? Like that's the biggest portion of the revenue for the business. So if people stop clicking on those search ads, well, what happens to Google's business?
Right.
I've actually noticed that pop up a lot more often. Like almost every search I've done in the last like a week. I don't search Google a lot anymore, but like I would say almost all of the searches I've done in the last week, I've seen that AI sort of summary thing come up at the top. I still end up clicking on the links though. Like usually if I'm Googling something, I'm trying to find a website. I'm not trying to find an answer to a question, because if I'm trying to find an answer to a question, I'm just going straight to ChatGPT these days, or Claude or something like that.
People are making a good point too. It's like almost like Google's like violating this social contract that always existed with the open web, right? Where it's like, hey, we're like searching all your stuff. We are taking your data and we're making money off of it, but we're going to also send people to you. And so that's always been this kind of like social contract that existed. So now if they are taking in people's data, but then they're just giving the answer, how are they, and then they're like, how could they possibly criticize ChatGPT? How could they criticize ChatGPT if OpenAI actually did crawl all of YouTube's data, like is the rumor that they did? I think they have a hard argument there. That's probably why they haven't like really went after it yet, because like they're doing similar.
Google's a web crawler scraping company, right? Like it scrapes the entire web's data also. The only difference is like when Google scrapes the web, it's actually beneficial to the creators. When ChatGPT scrapes the web, it sort of disincentivizes creators, right? There's definitely a big differentiator there.
For now. But it's changing. It's changing almost every month right now. So it's like every month it's like, people are going less to websites, but they're just getting the answer from Google. So I think Google's in a very tough situation there, and I don't know how they're going to get out of it.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, when it comes to like context windows, Google is currently the king, right? Like the Gemini now has a 1 million token context window, and they said that's jumping to 2 million tokens within the year. And just for, context, 1 million tokens is about 750,000 words input and output. So the amount of words that you can put into the prompt and get out is 750,000. So if they go to 2 million, that's 1.5 million words in and out context. That's enough to put in the entire Harry Potter book series and ask questions about it.
Talking about Steve Jobs again, like, it's like Steve Jobs wouldn't talk about all the specs, which now Apple's doing that crap too. Like Steve Jobs would talk about how this is an amazing new thing. He wouldn't talk much about the specs. Google's doing that same thing where they're like, here's the specs. It's all these here's the context window, how big it is. and versus OpenAI not even talking about that stuff. And I think it's a trap because, one of my friends was at the OpenAI event, and the rumor, around town in Silicon Valley is that GPT-5, don't really worry about the context window. There's like some major breakthrough where I'm not sure if the context window is going to be dramatically larger, but apparently something has changed, and they're like, that's not going to be much of an issue in GPT-5. And so I think with like Google trying to play that game of like, we have the largest context window, I mean, maybe GPT-5 is going to have like 10 million or 100 million or something ridiculous. Maybe they've made a breakthrough there. And so like the Google's going to look pretty silly. Like we've been playing this like stats game where we have the best, whatever, and the best specs. And that's not even, they're going to lose in that game as well, I think.
Yeah, I honestly think we're going to hit a point pretty soon where people just don't even talk about context windows. It's just going to be like a non-issue. They're going to be so big that the context window is essentially more than you need, like always.
Right.
The other thing that they talked about that was like pretty big news was their project Astra, which I don't know if you remember the demo, but they walked around with like an iPhone out, and the iPhone was seeing things, and they were having a conversation with the phone with what they were seeing, right? The example they showed in their demo was the video footage went to a speaker, and it was like, let me know when you see something that makes sound, right? And it was like, oh, I see a speaker on the table. And then they drew a little arrow on the camera and said, what's this part of the speaker called? And it was like, oh, that's called the tweeter, right? And then they walked around the room a little bit more with the camera, and then the girl in the demo was like, do you remember where my glasses were? And it actually remembered from earlier video footage, yes, your glasses were on that other desk over by the Apple. So she went over to where her glasses were, put on the glasses, and it was like this little Easter egg moment where she put on glasses, which looked like a hint at maybe a new version of Google Glass or something, right? Because she put on these glasses, set her phone down, and then continued to have a conversation with the AI bot, but now it was seeing what the glasses saw, and it also looked like it had a little tiny heads-up display, so whatever she was asking and whatever it was responding with, it was almost like captioning it in front of her face on the heads-up display. And Project Astra was actually one of the things that they had demos available. So I was actually able to demo Astra while I was at Google I/O, and I mean, it worked pretty much the way they showed it did in the demo. It wasn't, like previous Google demos where they made it look like real time, but it wasn't really real time. Like it worked just like the demo. Yeah. And I thought that was actually pretty impressive. I can see that being useful, especially when it gets into like glasses and stuff.
So since you really used it, so I'm curious, like from my perception was that the OpenAI voice was more responsive than the Google, but maybe the Google seemed to be taking more video input because it seemed to actually understand the surroundings a bit better than the OpenAI demo. So is that kind of like
there's definitely more of a delay, right? Okay. So when you were using the Google one, you would ask it a question, and then there would be like a 1, 2, 3, 4. It would respond.
Yeah.
The new version of ChatGPT, it was like almost instant, but if you pay attention, it uses like filler words to make it feel more instant, right? So what it would kind of do is you would ask it a question, and it would almost like repeat the question back to you.
Yeah.
And while it's repeating the question back to you, that's where that sort of delay, that latency would normally be. So you would say like, hey, what am I looking at? And it would say, okay, let me take a look. It looks like you're looking at, and then it would go into, its response.
Which is brilliant,
so it was using that like filler.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, speakers.
But it makes it feel more natural because we talk like that too.
Yeah. And engineers, there have been a few engineers on Twitter that have been speculating that the reason that the OpenAI model is so much more responsive is because it actually is a breakthrough in terms of being multimodal, whereas Google is basically kind of stitching these different models together behind the scenes. They got like a video model, they got a text one, all this, right, and audio. And then OpenAI actually announced that they're like, maybe people don't realize it because we don't really talk about the technical side much on the stage, but yeah, that's the big thing here. It's like this is a model where literally it's doing all three at one time. It's not just doing text and then it's not doing text or doing image and then like kind of like sending it to another model. No, this is all happening within the same model. That's why it's so fast. And so I think that was the thing that maybe a lot of people didn't realize.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a video model. That was another thing that like we're not going to cover everything that they covered at the Google event. There was just way too much. Right? It was like 2 hours of announcements. But another one that was kind of interesting, I guess, was Veo or VEO, right? Like they were basically acting like this was their Sora competitor, but if you put them side by side, Sora's still quite a bit better. But Veo, I think they said that can generate over 1 minute long videos in 1080p resolution. So, it's got the length and the kind of quality going for it, but it's not like as realistic as what we saw out of Sora. It was something where, people saw it, right? But everybody's like first thing is they're going to look at it and compare it to Sora, right? Sora is the best we've seen. Like that set the bar for AI video. And now you look at something like Veo and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. But because we've already seen Sora, it's hard to be impressed by it.
Yeah, and I wasn't impressed, and and Sora set the bar so high that like it's actually hurt all the other AI video companies, right? Like Runway and all the other ones, Pika, because like I used to share all these AI video threads, and they would get millions of views, and then now people are just not interested. Like you share it, and like people are like, "This is like garbage."
It's so hard to impress people now.
It's so hard to impress people.
Yeah. Well, one last thing that I will say about Google, and I did sort of like a recap video of my experience of Google I/O, and I said this in that video, is that going to events like the Google I/O event, it is really easy to look at Google as this like big, huge corporate, faceless company that just wants to harvest everybody's data and get as much money out of everybody as possible, right? Like I think that's the perception of the Googles and the Microsofts and the Metas of the world, right? But when I went to events like this, I got to meet so many of the people at Google, right? I got to meet like the various engineers, and I got to meet, project leaders on different projects that were working on a lot of this software. And the thing that kind of really struck me at this event was like, these people are really, really excited and really, really passionate about the tools that they're building. And so even though Google itself is like this big, faceless, massive mega corporation, the individuals working on these projects are really, really excited and really passionate about what they do. And it really sort of added to the humanity of Google for me, like actually getting to meet these people and talk with them. So, that's kind of the last little wrap-up thing that I wanted to say about Google is, the people at Google do care about the products that they're developing. They do care about what people think of these projects. They do want to make them the best they can make them. And that was the overwhelming sense that I got at that event. Now, fast forward to this week, I'm actually at Microsoft Build out in Seattle right now. Same kind of thing. I've got to talk to the CTO of Microsoft. I've gotten to talk to a whole bunch of project leaders on different projects at Microsoft, and actually getting to talk to the humans underneath these projects that are actually building these projects has been really interesting to me. It really, really does make me feel more connected to the company as a whole, just because I see the excitement of the people that are building these things. And so while at this Google event, there was really two keynotes that happened. There was the Monday keynote, which was like a Copilot / Surface keynote, like the consumer-facing products. And then And then on Tuesday was Microsoft Build. And Microsoft Build was the developer conference, which was really geared towards software engineers and people building the software. Not a whole lot of huge, exciting, crazy announcements that came out of Microsoft Build, but the event that happened yesterday was really, really interesting. They announced a new feature called Recall, which is really interesting. Basically, what Recall does is it watches everything that's happening on your computer and it saves it all. So it's like the history inside of your Chrome browser, but for your entire computer. So anything you built in Photoshop, anything that you made with like DaVinci Resolve, any tool that you used on your computer, it actually saved like a history of all of that. And you can go back and find all of that history. All of your browsing, all of your internet browsing, it saves all of that as well. It saves it all, and you can go back through your history, scrub through it, and find very, very specific points throughout your day. And I thought that feature was pretty cool, but it obviously brings up some like security, some privacy issues, like, oh, if it's recording everything I do on my computer, is Microsoft getting that data? Where does that go? What if there's websites that I don't want to be saved into my storage and remembered that I visited? Well, the cool thing about the Microsoft event, and one of the other announcements that they made, was that they're actually developing new computers to be AI first. So a computer typically has a CPU and a GPU in it. These new Microsoft computers have a CPU, a GPU, and now what they call an MPU, a neural processing unit. So it's like a separate card just to process the AI. So all of the AI that it's using to like record your computer and help you find what you did throughout the day, that is all happening locally on your computer. It's not actually going out to the cloud, and Microsoft isn't getting any of this data from you. You can be not connected to the internet and still save all this history. Plus, they have the ability to go back through and delete history that you don't want in there. So let's say you visited a website that you don't want other people to visit. Maybe you're gift shopping or something. Let's just use that as an example. I'm sure there's other examples we can go with, but let's use the example of gift shopping. You don't want somebody to come back, look at the history of your computer, and see what gifts you were looking at for them. So you can go and delete that from your history. So it's pretty secure, pretty private. They say they never are going to train on any of your data that it's saving. And supposedly it all stays local right on your computer. So that was one of the big announcements that they made. Well, two of the big announcements that they made. One was that they're making their PCs AI first. And the second one is that you're going to have this recall feature built directly into Windows. So everything you do on the computer, there's like a history of it that you can go back and find really, really easily using your AI search. The other big announcement they made at this event was that Copilot is kind of getting an overhaul. If you use Windows right now, you might notice Copilot is like a little pop-up thing that shows up on the right sidebar of your desktop. Well, now it's an actual app that can actually be snapped to Windows or float in front of other windows. And they showed off this really cool demo where you can actually chat with the bot and it will actually know what's going on with your computer and actually speak back to you. So going all the way back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, OpenAI released a Mac app for ChatGPT that's going to have the voice in it. And I think the reason that they didn't release the Windows app along with it is because they knew Microsoft was going to release this new version of Copilot, which kind of does all the same stuff. So that was the other thing that was the reason I think that OpenAI didn't announce a Windows app, because Copilot does that stuff. It can actually see what's going on your computer. You can talk to it with your voice. It will respond with a voice. It does that stuff as well. One of the really cool examples they showed off was they had Copilot open and then somebody was playing Minecraft, and supposedly they were playing Minecraft for the first time. They didn't know how to play, and they were having a conversation with the bot, and the bot was explaining to them how to play Minecraft based on what it saw on their screen. So it was like they opened up their inventory and asked the bot, what do I build with this inventory? And it's like, oh, you need to build an axe. And he's like, okay, I'll build an axe. And then it closes an inventory and the zombie pops up and he's like, what's that? What do I do? And the AI was like, run, it's a zombie, get out of here. So the AI was watching in real time as he was playing this game and actually giving feedback and telling him what to do next in the game. And that was also a really cool feature that they showed off at the Microsoft event. But it has been a whirlwind of AI announcements over the last couple of weeks. We've just been absolutely bombarded between OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft. And then in June, we also have a Cisco event coming up where they're going to be talking about how they're leveraging AI for cybersecurity. We have a Qualcomm event coming up, which is starting to make a lot of the AI chips that a lot of these products are using. In fact, at the Microsoft event, a lot of the Surface Pros are using Snapdragon chips from Qualcomm. So Qualcomm has a bunch of AI announcements coming up. And then also in June, we have WWDC from Apple, which is the Worldwide Developer Conference. This is their big event where they announce all of their big new features that are coming out. That's last year we got the announcement of the Apple Vision Pro. This year we're expecting a whole bunch of AI announcements, possibly a new AI Siri, but it has just been a crazy few weeks, and we have a few more crazy weeks coming up with these additional events that are happening. And hopefully Nathan and I are going to be able to keep you looped in and chatting about all of these upcoming events and filling you in on all of the big announcements that are happening. So if you're not subscribed to this podcast, make sure you're subscribed. We put out new episodes every Tuesday, and every once in a while, when we have really, really exciting events happening in the AI world, we're going to drop these bonus episodes in between our normal episodes to make sure that you're looped in and keeping your finger on the pulse of the latest news. So that's the goal. A lot of exciting things happening, and hopefully you're here for it because we're here for it. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode today.